Thank you all for being here. We're recording this too for members that weren't able to make it today. The early part of this, we'll have a board meeting immediately follow, training at a regular time, and then lunch will be here for too long. But Margaret and I met sometime back, I think it was after our last board meeting, and we got to talk about the retreat. Just coming up, and we said, what can we do to enhance the experience with not only the retreat, but also expedite some really important information about board training. And Margaret, why don't you give them a little bit of history? You all know Margaret, but and introduce our special guest and give them a little history about the board training the last time you did this.
Well, I am so happy to have this chance to talk with our board members who are here today and with Mark and to be with Ann Lampe, who is the CEO of the Museum Trustee Association. And she is a former museum director, and she travels the country talking about the leadership partnership that's so essential for museums around the country. And she's going to talk a little bit about our mission. But, you know, we talked about how important a board orientation can be. And I said, well, Mark, can we do a board orientation during the retreat? And he said, well, I want to keep the retreat really compact. And so he suggested that it happen before this board meeting. So we really want to applaud all of you who are here today, because you're already giving so much of your time and resources to the museum, and this shows just a really extraordinary dedication to the museum. So is that what you were thinking?
That's perfect. That's perfect. Yeah, one of the reasons we were concerned about the time of the retreat is that we only have 6 hours for the workshop that day, and we're really going to be doing some 30,000-foot view visioning and planning for the museum, and a lot of deep conversations about that. So this is very important information, but we want to make sure that we squeeze as much of this in before the retreat as possible, because this is the thing that we'll do every year. We'll have a refresher course on reminding new and old board members about our obligations to the museum as advisory board.
Well, thank you. Well, with that, Ann Lampe will lead us off. We can't really see her face, but she's...
I'm here.
She's here.
I'm here. So today, Margaret and I will in tandem, work through this question. What are museum board members' roles and responsibilities? And that is something that we found at MTA is a really important aspect of understanding completely your roles and responsibilities as board members, as advisory board members. And so with that, we'll get started. So the Museum Trustee Association is a national association, and we have museums from all across the United States, from the Metropolitan Museum of Art to local historical societies, where we work together to enhance their effectiveness by advancing the trustee-director partnership. And this is a really important partnership to make a museum and propel it move forward and propel its mission forward, and that the trustees and the director are working hand in glove to move that forward. We work in developing the governance skills of current and future trustees. And sometimes people have been on the board for a long time, occasionally need a refresher, and things evolve over time as well. We engage the museum community on the vital role that boards play. And they really do. They're the governance. They lead the way for the organization in our educational missions and for the sustainability of our museums, which are our cultural patrimony. So at MTA, we really strive to get that trustee-director partnership moving forward so that all aspects of the museum can move forward.
I love this slide because I took this photo outside of the Rodin Museum in Paris, and it made me think about my role on a board, because when you say yes, you're like, well, we're kind of chained together for 3, maybe 6 years, hopefully for 2 terms. Where will we go? That's the question. What will this voyage be like? Well, this might not be the kind of voyage we want to have. who's in charge here? Where are we going? The sail's not set. We're falling off, and we're crying for help. That's not who we want to be on a museum board in any way, shape, or form. This is what we want to be. We want to have the director at the helm, and the board chair is kind of up and looking out to the future. Our board members are on board, our staff is on board, and everyone knows their role and they know what lane they need to be in. So how do we know what is our guide star in that? What beacon are we looking toward? It's the mission statement. And one of the best boards I've ever served on, you'd walk in the boardroom, the board chair would, in addition to the LSU Museum of Art, okay, the board chair would open the meeting and the entire board would recite the mission statement by heart to begin the meeting. And we don't do that, but we could. Because we know that as advisory board members, which is unique to a university art museum board, we are in very much of a support role, and we support the overall mission and goals of the LSU Museum of Art. So that mission statement is something that we need to always keep uppermost in our mind. And of course, it's about collections, exhibition, conservation, education. It's the resource for the university, but also the community and the region, the state, and beyond. So what are our responsibilities? Well, as advisory board members, we are different from a fiduciary board. And of course, the attorneys in our midst understand that well, and the financial people. But we show this slide because it's important to keep these in mind, even if we are an advisory board and don't have that specific legal obligation when it comes to a fiduciary role. But the duty of care, which is exercising the best care that you can bring to the table, showing up, being there, voting, participating, reading your minutes, and don't vote on minutes if you haven't read them. Be sure that you've read them. Loyalty, which encompasses allegiance, confidentiality, and always understand the conflict of interest policy. And ask yourself before every meeting, am I in conflict in any way, shape, or form? And then obedience, and obedience can mean different things, but I think of obedience as respect for each other, for the board chair, for the director, and also how we reach consensus, whether we agree with the decision or not. And then a responsibility is to keep the institution afloat and thriving, and that has everything to do with fundraising.
And so fiduciary responsibility, even in an advisory board, many of these still apply. Protecting the public interest, protecting their interest in the objects that are in the collection, in the museum itself, protecting that. The legal requirements are not in the advisory board in the same way that they are in a standalone 501c3 board. But you do need to know that your advisory board and your museum is maintaining the documents and policies and bylaws that are going to fit underneath the university setting in which you reside. So number 3, you need to maintain your documents within that university setting, and the integrity of the organization. And I think this is really important in maintaining the integrity of the advisory board and avoiding those conflicts of interest. And they can come in multiple different ways. And we're going to talk about a board member agreement and those more specifically. And I'm sorry, I wonder if I can move this. Oh, yay. So now you can see number 5, because I think number 5 is really important. Effective lead, you're ensuring the effective leadership annually. You evaluate the director, and that is important. But as important is selecting and recruiting fellow board members. You're out in the community of the organization. You're in the community of the university, and you need to select and recruit and begin to engage new people to come onto the board. And that's a really important board member function that sometimes people put to the side. You need to self-assess your board performance annually. And it's something at MTA that building that leadership partnership is very important. The board needs to sit back and say, okay, let's survey ourselves and see how we did this year and see how we're moving forward. And I think that's also incredibly important. A lot of times people get focused on just assessing the director, but you need to assess yourselves as board members and how are you performing and what are you doing to keep the organization moving forward. Whoops, now I've lost myself how to move. Oh, darn it. Sorry. I'm going to go back.
Good. We can see it.
I don't know how to move. There we go. I'm going to take this back over here. Sorry to move it around. So strategic responsibility, ensuring that the organization's mission is being fulfilled and in everything you do as a museum organization, it should all direct back to the mission. And that's very important. Approving policies and major financial commitments. Again, advisory board sits underneath that university setting and that university finances. Although I think Mark is going to give you a more 360 view of how your finances come together. And that's important to have a full understanding of that. Long and short-term strategic plans. That's very much the board's strategic responsibility, thinking way ahead, thinking into the future for the museum, and understanding what are the opportunities and challenges that are going to come up 20 years down the road, and how can we start solving for them now and thinking about them now. So very important on those strategic responsibility. And then financial responsibility. And while you're an advisory board, there still are levers that you can pull that can help ensure the viability of the museum. And fundraising is everyone's responsibility, no matter how large or how small. And I say fundraising, friend raising, they work hand in hand. Very important thing to think about. And that takes a little pressure off people who don't like to fundraise. Make a friend, make a new friend for the museum. That brings new people in, that can bring new funding sources in. Looking at the adequate funding resources. So having that 360 view of how the museum is funding itself. You do get, financial reports. So overseeing those reports and looking at the budget review. Investment policies and underneath an advisory board, underneath a university, depending on the university and how it's set up, will depend on whether you're looking at investment policies. Usually the university takes that over. And then a 990, and again, that's for a standalone 501c3. Although I think your friends group has a 990. Is that right, Mark? I'm sorry.
That's right.
Yes. Okay, so you will be seeing some 990s as well.
This year, and I'm going to interrupt, the Friends organization is involved. We're going to actually another new member this afternoon that will be coming on the Friends board. So we're trying to build the strength of that organization to oversee and govern their own 501c3 a lot more effectively. And I think this will be the first year we'll have to have division and audit of the Friends group because of the revenue that we're generating now, which is a good thing. But we're going to have to follow some pretty stringent rules, in the sequence. It's going to be, we've got to make sure our ship is tight with the way we're spending the contributions that go to the Friends organization.
I like that analogy. It's good.
Well, the prior year's budget, prior 3 years, was very modest. Most of the membership dollars go through the foundation now. And so their revenue sources are predominantly just contributions from grants, individual gifts and things like that for projects. So last year, it was under the threshold of under $200,000. This year, we've got the grant from the Bridges Foundation, our Bridges, and then we also, one of you will be announcing later, made a tremendous contribution for collection storage upgrades, and that was $155,000. So it's putting us over the threshold. But we've got some other private grants we want to start using. We want to use the RISE gift as the leverage for NEA and NEH to get some more money raised. I think that we can see a lot more revenue go through the Friends group and before.
You mentioned something there about, I think we get off topic here a minute, but that we can't go through the foundation. I was surprised when I got my charitable back that the foundation had taken a buyout of that. I wanted my money to go to the museum, and I didn't want it to go to the foundation.
Yeah.
I mean, Clearly, I was pissed off.
No, well, you're exactly right. One of the things that I'm trying to change is that we want to continue to have memberships because they don't take a piece of the membership gifts. They only take a larger, I think it's 30%, it's 5% gifts of annual giving. So we're trying to shift a lot of those individual gifts, with the exception of memberships, larger gifts to the Friends organization, which can administer those a lot more effectively. So most of those are profit driven. What we need the foundation to help start doing is raising significant endowment for the museum, help us raise those major gifts that they can manage and spend on revenue for us. And they're agreeable to that. I think they see, what our plan is. We just need to make it happen.
But should board members start contributing to the Friends group as opposed to
this is why everybody should attend the retreat. Oh, that's one of the discussions.
To be unveiled.
Could we move
okay.
We could legally in every way possible, but in principle, the foundation probably friend on it. So, but we got one, and I invited the foundation representative to come out and answer some questions for us during the retreat too. So ask them the hard questions.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. So another thing that's important for all boards is that they have a very active and vibrant committee structure. Most of board work really should be done in the committee meetings, and board members, at least on the boards that I've run previously, are members of at least 3 committees, depending how many committees each individual organization has. But it's important to have a committee structure and participate in that as a board member. And oftentimes the committees allow for prospective new board members to join and be part of a committee, or volunteers to feel more of a part of the organization. Some sample committees are nominating and governance. And again, I emphasize to you all that finding new board members is a big part of your job and growing your organization in that way. So nominating governance, collections committee is very important as well. Development and fundraising, and everybody doesn't want to get on that committee. But again, you can make friends for the organization, which can help in development and fundraising. You don't have to necessarily go for that hard ask. And I can just tell from Mark, and this is the way I always operated as a director, you introduce me to somebody and take us all out to lunch and I'll do the hard part. I'll ask. And you can, ask about the kids and the grandkids and all that other good stuff. And the director will make the ask. So don't be afraid of fundraising. And then special projects, depending on the organization. There's often an education committee. In a standalone 501c3, there'll be a membership committee. Sometimes hospitality and also sometimes finance, just depending on the structure of the organization. But having a good committee structure and having good, vibrant committees where people can really spend time together and work through issues and ideas is very important, because not all that work can be done in board meetings. Otherwise, they just become too long and too laborious. So, to the next, to nominating, Margaret.
So I'll add on to that what Ann said, because get ready for a momentum shift, because I think Mark has already stated that our committees will have more momentum and will be more engaged. And so that's a great thing moving forward. And we didn't put this slide up just because I'm a past chair of the nominating committee for the LSU Museum of Art. We put this up because Ann and I have been guest speakers for several museum studies classes at different universities. And last spring, the museum studies class at UNC Greensboro was using this book, Fundraising for Small Museums. And I was reviewing it, and I came upon this quote and I was like, wow. The nominating committee is the most important committee, just a step ahead of the development committee. Well, there are a lot of good reasons why that is. And that's because you have to get the right people on the bus. And most of you who have been on the board for a couple of years have seen this chart that we worked on because we did a board survey. That's the next slide, Ann.
Sorry.
And you were asked to serve on the board because, not just because you were a friend of a friend, or yes, because of your skills and expertise and what you bring to the museum. And that's considerable. And so we took a good hard look, right, Nancy, at the skills and talents around the table that we had, and what do we need? And, you know, some years we were high in people who have been well-versed in higher ed. That's really important at a university. Some people have a lot of nonprofit expertise. There was communication need. We needed people who are involved in marketing, people who have collections expertise, of course, the business and corporate community, legal, accounting. So all those areas, they all come together to form this wonderful synergy that makes up a museum board that helps advance the institution. So as you know, part of our process after the nominating committee has identified a prospect list and we've cultivated new members for the board. This is a tool that came to us from the Museum Trustee Association. So hopefully each one of you have seen it when you were asked to serve on the board. But we really love this because it gives you both sides of the equation in this partnership. And what your expectations are. You know, we went over the duty of trust, the duty of care, the duty of loyalty. Those, even, we really included this in here because whether you're fiduciary or advisory, those are real North Stars for us. And then as we move on, it talks about stewardship, what's expected, attending 75% of meetings, which is really standard across the board. I won't read over all these, but it has to do with digging in, doing your homework, showing up, serving on committees. And then that financial support piece is so important in there to always be sure you're a member of the museum and making the museum one of your top philanthropic priorities at a level which is meaningful to you. You know, we do set a number, but there's a balance, and we'll move on to the next page, that it's financial support, but it's also time and resources, and what you're bringing in resources. There's so many ways to bring resources to a museum. So, and I love this part that in turn, the Museum of Art will be responsible to us as museum board members. We'll get the information we need. We have the communication channel with the director, and that is the lane we need to stay in. You know, unless we're on a committee and we're interacting with staff members, we always go through the director. But you know what's expected and you know what you'll receive. And I wish I could add a fifth, which is the incredible enrichment and enjoyment that being on a museum board affords each one of us, because that's something we never, ever want to lose sight of. So,
Margaret, can I interrupt for just a second?
Of course.
Yeah, well, I want to just add and emphasize one thing, because I had a very valuable lesson there that I thought would never happen to me. And I wasn't talking about fears happening to other institutions too. You might recall the second wave of COVID. We all came through the first wave pretty whole, because people were like that. The second wave came. We saw the continued reduction in revenue. We saw the continued increase in staff costs. So we had to make some hard choices. So I had a staff of 28, which we had to reduce by 8 in the second wave. And it wasn't anything other than just, we don't need these positions. We just had to make hard choices. And what happened was, we had a well-named, misguided board member who was friends with a lot of the staff, and the ones that we let go started calling them board members, and she got everybody all riled up with the problems. And she said, "Well, I don't understand. They were calling me." And I said, "Well, you shouldn't look at the phone." They're gonna be mad. You know, it's just the case. But it's an important thing, like you said, for us to respect each other's roles, and the director really has to manage the staff in a way that they feel confident. And it also is protection for them. But sometimes board members go after staff members and they feel threatened by a board member, well, they shouldn't, because they don't work for the board member, they work for the director. And so it's an important, important balancing there.
Thank you for adding that. I mean, that's part of the staying in your lane part, and not every board keeps that uppermost in mind. So, okay.
School boards are real bad.
So we wanted to share with you today a national report so that you could situate the LSU Museum within the national scope. Yes, this was done in 2017, so the numbers are a little older, but it was commissioned by the American Alliance of Museum, Board Source, and Northern Trust came together. And they sent out a survey, and who responded? 1,700 directors and board chairs. And this is about board performance nationally. So you can situate yourself within this larger group, larger scope. The type of museums that responded, and you see here that history museums, historic house, and historic sites are the largest type of museums in our country. And that often catches people by surprise. And then art museums and sculpture museums are the second largest with 24%, multidisciplinary, children's museums, and we go on from there. But the history museum, the historic house and site, is the largest at 48%. And so think about that in terms of across the country and the types of museums. Budget size. 27% of these museums are running under $250,000 a year. 31% are running under $1 million a year. So that's a very large percentage of our cultural patrimony that's being cared for and kept in these very small institutions. And then I believe LSU sits within that 1 million to 5 million zone, which is one of the larger zones. And it's one of the larger sizes of museums that we at MTA tend to service. And people think, oh, museums are so big, 50 million and more. Well, that's only 1%. That's, 3 museums in the country that operate at that size. So you can see where you fit in the larger scheme of the country and museums. Now, they gave museum boards a report card, and it's very interesting to see what the museum directors think the boards do well and what museum chairs think the board does well. And so you can just see from understanding the mission at the very top as the highest scoring to the lowest scoring is monitoring performance against goals and objectives. And that's also monitoring the board itself and the board report card. So it's interesting, museum directors didn't give anything over a B+, and the chairs thought A for the understanding the mission. So that's why that museum partnership, the leadership partnership, is so important, so that you're coming together. I mean, it's not too far off on scoring, but so that you're coming together on things. So I'm going to overview that, and now Margaret's going to look at the top rated items. Okay,
so yay, we can celebrate, because as museum advisory board members, we know our mission. We're really good at financial oversight. Kudos to our finance committee chairs and finance committee members, and to all of our board members for keeping an eye on the finances with the director, and then guiding and supporting the director. We can always do better at that. And we talked a little bit about understanding what our lane is. However, the lowest rated, just to shine a magnifying glass on this just for a second, we really can do better at increasing our board diversity. And we've talked about that. What is that? It can be age and gender. It can be what we looked at, what areas of Baton Rouge and the state and the region that we draw from. Also, what our cultural background is. How do we better reflect our university population and community and the community around us? And I think Mark is really thinking more about having more board members who draw from a wider range from which our alumni and our university draw. Advocacy, I could go on and on about advocacy, but I won't. But you know that I go to Museums Advocacy Day every year in DC. But there's a lot of advocacy that we can do as time goes on, but our director will really have to, Mark will really need to guide us so that we know not to go to lawmakers directly unless we have our talking points and we're all on message. And then fundraising, we will talk about that in just a minute. But those are things we can do better on. So there's the board report card. And can we raise our grades? You know how hard it is to raise our grade point average, but we can do it. I think we do well in so many of these areas. And I think at the board retreat, Mark will be focusing on what the strategic goals will be moving forward. So what's the heavy lift? Well, yes, as board members, we do have a heavy lift. Sometimes this is the face that you get when you ask someone to join the board and they say, but don't ask me to fundraise. Just don't ask me to do that. But it's a good feeling when you can lift that weight. So, okay. So one thing that I found, because I've been on several university art museum boards, is the funding is hard to grasp. I really had a tough time saying, where's the funding come from? Because I've had people say to me, oh, well, the city handles that or the state handles that. And that's really not so, that there's so many different pieces of this pie and they're all incredibly important and they all work to form a really cohesive, important whole. So there's public funding, there's earned revenue, membership, annual giving. There's so many ways for board members to dig into this. Education, marketing, programming. One can donate to the collection. One can support grant applications if one has an advocacy background and links to policymakers. That's really important. Then planned giving is another great way to add to the budget. And then capital campaigns. And, one day there may be one in our future. Who knows? And then, of course, building improvements and transformational gifts. These are all different buckets that all come together to form. And I'm sure that Mark will be going over more specifics. I'm going to go over this really quickly, but I really think that our profit and loss statement is for an art person with an art background is really well done and easy to understand because you see those three big buckets, the state operating, earned revenues, and contributed revenues. Did you want to say something, Mark?
Yeah, so we really have a three-leg stool where most of our funds are funneled either through come from the universities. Predominantly, all they do is pay for part of the salaries, not all of them, and they pay our lease in the space of its building and its maintenance and utilities. That's it. There are some small things that we get our departmental charges for that we have to pay for from other sources. Those other sources are the foundation funds that we've established over there, the annual fund, a collections fund, all these different funds that are sitting in the foundation. But then we also have this 501c3 private nonprofit entity, the Friends of the Museum, that we use to manage larger private gifts and sponsorships and things like that from like the casino. Gave us a gift, I understand, to be open on Friday nights. I think that was what their gift was directed to or something like that. That went to the Friends. That doesn't go to the foundation. It doesn't go to the university. So we've got sort of a three-leg stool. But we're trying to give more comprehensive oversight of how those funds all operate.
So those numbers have the Friends in there too.
They're not integrated in a way that I think is effective. No, this is just an example. Yeah. Is this just an example?
Yeah, this is an example. Yeah, it's really meant to just highlight, and in the next couple of slides, just being prepared for the discussion of the budget, understanding that there are restricted funds, and just really studying this so that you ask the right questions, because we don't always know the right questions to ask. And as I said, I would imagine, Mark, you're going to dig more into this perhaps at the retreat. Okay.
So I'm gonna, because I'm sorry, I couldn't quite understand what Mark was saying. Margaret, I'm gonna go ahead to your notes section. Is that all right? I think you
That's
might.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Keep
So I'll
going.
just go there. Is that?
Yeah, that's great. Yeah. But to me, this is one of the most valuable pieces of information for a board member, because you get the notes to the financials. And so you understand where the earned revenues come from in a narrative form. And for example, when there was an increase in riverboats, that was why earned revenue went up. It gives you an explanation as to why the expenses were less. And it always read the notes, because I find there are many times when board members will just not read the notes, look at the financials, say, oh, this went up, this went down, and it really takes up valuable time during the board meeting. So it's just a quick reminder, and I hope we continue doing those notes. It's well done, I think.
Okay.
And then understanding these revenue categories, which Mark really talked about just a second ago. It's hard to hear you, but these are different buckets, and they have restrictions attached to each one of them. And so we need to understand that they're just not interchangeable, and every single revenue area is important in its own way.
And I like to talk about a museum is an engine that has all these different parts and all those different revenue categories. All of those engines need to be revving to make it all come together, to work together. And I like to think of it that way also, because just as Margaret said, the different areas are used for specific things. And so all those engines have to be revving to move the budget forward, to move income forward, and understanding that.
Okay, so we're heading in the home stretch here, and we're going to wrap up with a couple of slides on donor motivation, because I think that's really important. And this was in that Fundraising for Small Museums book for the museum studies class. And it does, I asked myself, well, why do I give? Well, yeah, I think direct experience is important. I loved interacting with that Warhol exhibition. But, a board member and a visitor has an affinity perhaps for a different kind of exhibition, whether it was the Impressionist exhibition we had in the past, or it was Katie Andre. There's so many different ways that people can feel motivated to support a museum, and excellence has so much to do with it, that we're best in class. And then what is each individual's passion for what's in the museum, and what are their priorities? So those are just kind of big things to think about in approaching people to support on any level that they're able and have affinity for. One thing I wanted to bring up was, not only are annual funds important, but giving days for universities have become really, really essential in the whole development and advancement program. And this is one from UNC Greensboro from 2022. I think we started these in maybe 2021. And this one raised in 2022 $1 million. And you'll see on the next slide that the Weatherspoon Art Museum, we did a challenge. And a donor said, okay, I'll put up $1,000, and if it's matched, then I'll give it. So, those are matching gifts. What this can do is it can just bring new donors into the museum fold. And I was happy to see on the LSU website, the next slide, that on the LSU Museum of Art website, that the Giving Day is prominently featured. And I kind of dug into it. Yeah, the next slide was, I was like, okay, let me look. I went to the LSU Giving Day website, and I looked at this, and like, okay, in 23, we had 50 donors. How many will we have? That zero next to it is for 24. So how can we increase the number of donors to the giving day, which is March 29th? So that's coming up fast. So the next one, this was great, Mark, that you put this on the website. The 1, 2, 3, because it can be a little tricky to get through a Giving Day website if you're not familiar with it. But you go to Arts and Culture, select LSU Museum of Art, and then make the gift. So perhaps in the future, we'll have a board challenge. Mark may have that on his radar, but that is a great way to get in new donors. Mark, do you have any thoughts on that? Or
I think, the interesting thing about the Giving Days is we from looking at the track record, at least over the past 5 years, we've never been over goal. So we have to stay the goal. And we've come close 2 years, but we've never really reached it. And I think part of it is that we, like you said, we in the future, we may take all of the board's annual gifts and use that as a challenge to the public to say, look what our board's done. And now let's see if you can match that. And I think that'll be real demonstrative to the community that we've got great support. And when we fill out board grant applications, Jerry knows this, there's always this question, how much participation do you have with your board of trustees or advisors? Financially and in participation, attendance, and all of this, that's really, really important. It's demonstrative how engaged.
On the example given, where we had 50 basically participants, was there a dollar figure to be met?
That was last year. Sandy, I think it was close to 3,200 last Giving Day.
I believe so.
I was trying to figure out which.
And we have a goal.
This year we set it at 5.
Okay.
I think if we could exceed that, even if we went to 10, we would make a big story out of it. And we've given it a purpose. In the past, it's just been just support us.
Right.
This year, we're focusing on we need equipment to share all of our experiences here. We have a brown bag this week. Is that this week? No, it's next week.
Yeah.
So we should be capturing all of those presentations and rebroadcasting them on YouTube. As an institution, it's just really important to capture those as an educational institution too. This faculty can use those too. But we have no equipment. The last recording I made and posted on YouTube, I did with my cell phone. And that's not really great quality. So we're giving them a tangible, we're going to do this if you do this.
It works for that funding. It's a little work.
Yeah, it works for this. Yeah. So, we've never given up a goal. Say this next year, maybe something even bigger. So,
well,
and having the prepared information that was actually circulated last year. So we could shoot that out to our friends and families and that kind of thing. And some of those opportunities allow you to do a video note, and it doesn't have to be complicated. Matter of fact, they come off as more authentic if they're kind of a little bit raggedy, not highly produced. But that's always helpful in a show.
So who is that speaking?
Jerry.
Is it Jerry? Awesome. Jerry, you are right on target. And the reason why we just put up these slides was to give you kind of a 50,000 foot look at what's happening out there with art museums, university art museums and universities, but you're right on target with that. And the social media part of this is really important, where whether you post a video or you put it on your social media and say, look, we've got a board challenge. And this has been a really effective way of bringing in new donors at incremental amounts, that it's almost more important to get the number of people rather than, the total is always important. But well, we're going to wrap up here, but I think that LSU Museum of Art, we have such a bright future. We are sailing on the wind. We great leadership and great board members. And thank you all for being part of this today. The engagement, the enrichment, the enlarging experience of being on a University Art Museum board. Each one of you has been an inspiration to me as I've been on the board, and I just see great things ahead. And we're going to wrap up with Ann Lampe kind of giving us our final thoughts, and then if you have any questions, if we can hear them, then we're done in just a second.
So yes, and Margaret is right. You've got a great executive director steering that boat, great chair, and the board and the staff are all in the boat together looking forward towards the future. And this leadership partnership is so essential in understanding our roles and responsibilities. And the board has so many different levers it can pull to propel the LSU Museum forward. And just as an overview, your legal responsibilities, your fiduciary responsibilities, remember new board members and self-assessing to keep that moving forward, thinking strategically, thinking way out into the future, and that financial responsibility. And being in committees and getting a lot of those nitty-gritty things done in committees so that when you come together as a board, you can be really looking long into the bright future of the LSU Museum. Margaret asked me to shamelessly plug MTA here at the end, but we are having a great forum and patron weekend coming up in Atlanta. We have another forum and patron weekend coming up in September in Tucson, Arizona. It's a great opportunity to get to know other folks who are board members in other capacities at other institutions, and many times that networking and shared learning can be crucial and just absolutely helpful to you in your role at your museum and moving it forward, and sharing ideas is so fruitful. So thank you very much, and thanks to Margaret very much for doing this with me. I'm going to stop sharing.
And Margaret, we want to thank you for all your time and dedication to the field and all that you're doing for America's Museum Trustees and support of America's museums. It's a real honor to have you both do this for us today.
And on behalf of the advisory board, I'd like to also give our special thanks, especially to our board members, both Margaret and Ann. Interesting enough, I know that every board member needs this type of orientation, and I've been on the board almost 6 years, and I don't remember having an orientation. So I think it's very important that we get this to each of our members.
Thank you, and thank you all, and thank you for the time that you spend for the museum. It is inspirational to me. And we're going to be going on to the board meeting in just a minute, so you want to have a little turnaround time. So thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Bye. Thank you, Ann.